My sister raised her glass at my father's 70th birthday dinner and smiled the way people smile when they've already won. "I have an announcement," she said, loud enough to carry across every seat at the long table my mother had spent 2 days setting. "Mom and Dad are transferring the family investment account to me. Full ownership. Alma gets nothing." The room didn't erupt. "It did something worse," it murmured. A soft, approving sound, the kind that fills a space when people have already made up their minds. My uncle nodded from across the table. My cousin lifted his glass in a small, instinctive toast. Even a woman sitting 2 seats down from my mother, someone I barely recognized, maybe a neighbor, leaned in and said, "Oh, how wonderful." I didn't look at my sister. I looked at my father. He was staring at his plate. "Dad," I said quietly, just loud enough for the people nearby to hear, "do you want to explain what that account is, or should I?" The murmuring stopped. My father's hand moved toward his wine glass and then pulled back. My mother's fork hovered in midair. My sister's smile held for exactly 2 seconds before it began to crack at the edges. But before I take you into what happened in that silence, I need to tell you something first. My name is Alma. I'm 32 years old. I grew up in a house with 3 bedrooms, a leaky faucet my father swore he'd fix for 11 years, and a family that looked, from the outside, like any other family on our street. A little loud at the holidays, a little proud of the photos on the wall, held together by Sunday dinners and the quiet agreement that some things you simply did not talk about. One of those things always was my sister. Not that she didn't come up. She came up constantly. Celia was 2 years younger than me, and she had always been the kind of person a room rotates around without knowing it's doing it. Teachers loved her. Neighbors remembered her name. When she was 12, she convinced our entire extended family to sit through a 90-minute play she'd written and directed in our backyard. And every one of them clapped. I don't say this to be unkind. There is a particular kind of person who simply draws warmth the way a south-facing window draws light, and Celia was that person. I was the window facing north. That didn't mean I was cold. I just learned early that I would have to build my own warmth. When I was 19, I left our hometown in Michigan to study finance in Columbus. My parents called it impulsive. My mother cried twice at the airport, which sounds touching until you realize she didn't cry when I graduated 4 years later. Celia stayed local. She took classes at the community college, met her fiancé there, and got a job at the same salon where my mother had been getting her hair cut since 1998. She was 20 minutes away and present for every Sunday dinner I missed. I want to be clear, I didn't resent her for staying close. I resented the shape of what that closeness made everyone decide. The investment account had existed since I was 8 years old. My father explained it to me once, sitting at the kitchen table with a piece of graph paper and a pencil, drawing little lines going upward. "For your education," he said, "and after that, for your start." My mother made contributions. My father made contributions. When I began earning my own salary, I made contributions too, every year, without being asked, because the account listed me as a co-holder and because I genuinely believed, that I was building something shared, a family foundation. Proof that belonging didn't require proximity. When Celia turned 25, she was added to the account. I didn't mind. Family money is family money. I minded what came next. 8 months before my father's birthday dinner, my mother called me on a Tuesday evening. She said they were doing some estate planning and needed me to sign a few documents to simplify things. The word simplify landed a half second before everything else, and something behind my sternum quietly tightened. My mother is many things, but casual about money she is not. She grew up without much of it, and that made her careful in ways that sometimes crossed into secretive. I drove home the following weekend. The documents were waiting on the kitchen table in a manila envelope, the kind that looks like someone wanted it to appear ordinary. My father sat across from me. My mother stood near the counter with a glass of water she didn't drink. I read slowly. Finance teaches you that speed is how you miss things. What I found on the third page was not simplification. It was a change of ownership structure. Primary holder moved from joint to single. The name listed as the new single holder was not mine. "This is just for estate purposes," my father said before I had even looked up. "Less complicated if there's only one name on these things." "Whose name?" I asked. He didn't answer immediately. "We can explain all of it later." I put the documents back in the envelope and told them I would have my financial advisor review them before I signed anything. My mother looked at me like I had answered in a language she didn't speak. My father nodded too quickly, the nod of someone trying to end a conversation they have already lost. I drove back to Columbus that night with the envelope on my passenger seat and a very specific feeling in my chest that I had learned over the years to pay attention to. My advisor called 3 days later. She was direct, which is one of the reasons I'd kept her for 6 years. The documents, she said, were structured to remove me as co-holder and transfer full controlling interest to a single account holder. That holder being Celia. There was nothing automatically illegal about it, she explained. But there was something I should see before deciding whether to sign. Over the prior 14 months, $23,000 from the account in increments small enough to avoid triggering automatic alert thresholds. I sat with that for a long time. I didn't call my parents. I didn't call my sister. I called the financial institution directly, confirmed the pattern myself, and requested a complete transaction history going back 5 years. Then I asked what process existed for placing an administrative dispute hold on any pending ownership transfer. The representative walked me through it patiently. The hold would take effect within 10 business days. Being filed by a co-holder, it would freeze any transfer attempt until the dispute was reviewed. It would also generate notifications to all parties listed on the account. I filed the dispute. I waited. My parents called once. 2 weeks later, a general check-in. The kind that doesn't mention the thing everyone is thinking about. My father asked about work. My mother asked if I was eating enough. Neither of them mentioned the envelope. Neither did I. By the time my father's 70th birthday weekend arrived, I had a folder on my phone. Screenshots of the transaction history, the withdrawal pattern, the dispute confirmation, and the institutional communication confirming the hold was active. I didn't print anything. I didn't need the theater of a physical folder. I had something better, a timestamp on every document, and the knowledge that any attempted transfer would trigger a notification to my father's registered email. I wasn't certain when that notification would arrive. I wasn't certain it would arrive that weekend at all. As it turned out, I didn't need it to. The birthday dinner was at my parents' house, the same house I grew up in, freshly repainted on the shutters, in a color that didn't quite match. My mother had cooked for 2 days straight. Cousins I only saw once a year filled the chairs around the extended table. My uncle arrived with his annual weather observation about Ohio. My grandmother sat at her usual corner with a cup of tea she preferred over wine, watching everything with the patient attention of someone who has seen enough of life to no longer be hurried by any of it. My grandmother is the kind of woman who says less than she knows. She had called me the night before I drove home, not to ask anything, just to say she was glad I was coming. The way she said it made me understand that she knew more about that weekend than anyone had told her directly. I sat 2 seats from my father. Celia sat to his right, her fiancé beside her. He was a careful, quiet man, an engineer by training, precise with his words, the kind of person who measures twice before committing to anything. I had always respected him for that. I had thought, privately, that he was the most grounded presence in my sister's life. Dinner moved with the familiar texture of large family gatherings. Too much food, overlapping conversations, my uncle's commentary arriving exactly on schedule. I watched my mother's face when she thought no one was watching. She was working very hard at something, performing ease in a way that required constant effort. When the cake came out, chocolate, my father's favorite, my sister stood up. The table quieted. People assumed she was offering a toast, which she was, just not the kind anyone expected. She raised her glass. She spoke about how much she loved our parents. She spoke about stability and legacy, and the meaning of choosing to stay close. She spoke about families and responsibilities. Every sentence was heading somewhere specific, and I could feel each one settling, like something placed deliberately on a surface. Then she said it. Mom and Dad are transferring the family investment account to me. Full ownership. Alma gets nothing. The murmur rippled around the table. My uncle nodded. My cousin raised his glass. I looked at my father. He was staring at his plate. Dad, I said, do you want to explain what that account actually is, or should I? The murmuring stopped. My father looked up slowly. My mother's fork was still suspended. My sister's expression had shifted from triumphant to wary, and that shift told me she already sensed something was coming. She just didn't know its shape yet. What does that mean? She asked. Her announcement voice was gone. She sounded younger. It means, I said, that the account you're being given isn't just a gift from our parents. It's an account I've been contributing to for 9 years, with my own money, every month, because I believed it was a family asset. Around the table, people went very still. And it means that over the last 14 months, about $23,000 left that account in withdrawals that no one told me about. My father set his napkin down. Alma, this is not the time for this. You chose the time, I said. Not me. You let her stand up at this table and announce it in front of everyone. I'm just here. Celia's fiancé leaned forward. He looked at my sister. What account? He asked carefully. She didn't answer right away. That pause was everything. The investment account, I said. The one being transferred to her name without my signature, and, from the sound of it, without your knowledge either. He looked at Celia steadily. You told me that was something we were planning to start together, after the wedding. It's complicated, she said. How much is in it? He asked. The silence that followed had a different quality than the silence before, not heavy, sharp. I set my phone on the table, screen facing up, the transaction summary visible to anyone within reach. As of last week, after the withdrawals, just over $80,000, down from $107,000 18 months ago. My uncle cleared his throat. My cousin put her glass down very carefully. Where did the rest go? Celia's fiancé asked. He wasn't asking me. My father said nothing. My mother had pressed her napkin to her face. We had expenses, my father said at last, some medical things, some other things that came up. The home equity loan, I said, the one from 2019. My father's face changed. I requested the full transaction history, I said quietly. I've had it for 6 weeks. Alma, my mother's voice broke on the word, please don't do this to us here. Mom. I kept my voice even because I had practiced being even. I had practiced it every day for the past 2 months. I didn't design this evening. I just came prepared for it. My grandmother set her teacup down. The sound was small. Everyone heard it. She didn't raise her voice. She has never needed to. She looked at my father with 67 years of knowing him compressed into a single expression. You look at your daughter, she said, and you tell her the truth. Not later. Now. The table held its breath. My father's jaw worked. He tried to speak twice and stopped. My mother was crying quietly, and then my sister did something I hadn't anticipated. She asked her fiancé to step outside with her. He looked at her for a moment, that careful, measuring look, and then stood and followed her out through the back door. They were gone for 20 minutes. When he came back, he sat down without speaking. I saw him check his phone twice. He had the focused, quiet expression of someone reading something important for the first time. After dinner, after the plates were cleared and most of the relatives had drifted toward their coats, I sat at the kitchen table with my parents. My sister sat at the far end. Her fiancé stood near the window. My father talked slowly, the way people confess things they've been carrying too long. The withdrawals had started when my mother needed a procedure, they hadn't told us about because they hadn't wanted to worry anyone. Some money went to the equity loan they'd taken years ago and never mentioned, which had compounding interest they hadn't accounted for. They had meant to repay everything. They had told themselves the account was the quietest solution. Take what was needed, replace it later, let it settle. Later kept not arriving. When they decided to transfer the account to my sister, they had told themselves it was estate planning. What it actually was, I think, was a way to feel less guilty about what they'd already done. If the account belonged to one daughter instead of two, it felt less like something that needed explaining. They hadn't thought about what my sister would do with it publicly. They hadn't thought about what her fiancé would understand. They hadn't known that I had already filed a dispute hold 6 weeks prior, which meant any transfer attempt would be automatically frozen pending a co-holder review, meaning my signature, which I had not given. My father asked what I intended to do. I told him I needed time, that I would not be rushed. He nodded. He looked older than he had at the start of the evening, smaller, the way people look when the weight they've been holding inside them finally stops being held. Before I left that night, my grandmother found me near the front door. She is small now, smaller than she used to be, but she held my arm with a steadiness that hasn't changed in 30 years. She looked at me in the particular way she has. Not proud, not sad, something more precise than either. You didn't light a fire, she said. You refused to let one burn underground. I held on to that the whole drive home. In the weeks that followed, things settled into a different shape. My parents began working with a financial advisor, a real one, on how to address what had accumulated. The account stayed under dispute hold until I had a formal accounting of every transaction, every source, every dollar in and out. My sister called me in the 3rd week of November, not to argue, not to explain herself, just to say she was sorry. I believed her. I believed her because she also said she hadn't fully understood what she was being handed, that she had wanted it because it felt like being chosen, and she hadn't stopped to ask what she was being chosen over, or what it had cost someone else to build that account across 9 years of quiet, automatic monthly contributions she hadn't known about. We talked for close to an hour. It was the most honest conversation we'd had since we were teenagers, lying in our separate rooms, with the lights off, talking through the dark, about what we each wanted our lives to look like. Her fiancé, I heard later from my mother, had asked some formal questions of a legal nature regarding the account's contribution history, and what rights that history might convey. I don't know exactly what he concluded. I hope they worked through it together. He was, as I've said, a careful person, and careful people tend to build things that last. I released the dispute hold in February, after the accounting was completed and a formal agreement was drawn up. The account stayed in both our names, mine and my sister's, with a documented contribution record attached, not what my parents had planned, not what my sister had announced at that table in front of the nodding uncle and the lifted glasses. But the truth rarely is what someone else has planned for it to be. What I know now, that I didn't know how to say then, is this. Keeping quiet is not the same thing as keeping peace. Letting something go is not the same as being all right with it. The woman who prepares carefully, who files a dispute hold 6 weeks before the dinner, who keeps her voice steady when everyone else in the room is waiting for her to come apart. She is not cold. She is not bitter. She just understands, the way my grandmother understands, that a house doesn't stay standing if you never talk about where the water is getting in. If you've ever sat at a family table knowing something that no one else at that table was ready to hear. I'd like to know where you're listening from tonight, because there are more of us than people tend to assume. And knowing that has made me, in ways I'm still learning to name, considerably less alone.